Thank you very much, Gabby and Ramzi and everybody for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. We just arrived yesterday. So I'm going to spend 30 minutes to talk to you about the blockchain, which is very much the most innovative and most important technology since the internet in terms of its impact, scope, and potential. So when you think about the internet and what it did for us, for you, for everybody in the last 23 years, and you think about the magnitude of this impact, and think about that something else is coming on the horizon that's going to have a similar magnitude of impact, and that is the blockchain. So I'm going to spend a bit of time explaining to you what the blockchain is, unpacking it. It's not very easy to understand the blockchain right away. It is not just one thing. It is many things at the same time. So the reason why I wrote the book is because I wanted to explain it to a non-technical audience. The first 5 years of the blockchain and the Bitcoin history, which started in 2008, were really dominated by technical discussions and technical research. But I think now we're entering a new phase of business applications of the blockchain, and that is why I call the book The Business Blockchain. So the next slide, if I were to give you one quick definition of the blockchain, in a nutshell, it's a new technology that is enabling the peer-to-peer transmission of electronic value without any intermediaries. So that is really the innovation of the blockchain, is to allow the exchange of money. So value here, read it like money, but money is just one form of value. Value could be assets, could be bonds, stocks, financial instruments. Anything that could be digital can now be transmitted from one person to another without having anybody in the middle. So you're going to say, well, what's new about that? We can do this with banks. And the new innovation about the blockchain is that it's about 3 different fields that have come together. The field of software engineering, because it's really about programming money. Next slide is about cryptography science, because cryptography is used to encrypt the data. So we use that for security purposes. And game theory. Game theory is a way to validate the transactions. And for the first time, the 3 fields came together. And this started by the paper that the mysterious person called Satoshi Nakamoto wrote in 2008. And he described a way to use gaming theory to transmit money from one person to another without having somebody in the middle. And he used that by solving what was called the Byzantine's generals problem, which was something that was plaguing computer science and everybody for decades, and nobody could solve that problem. And the problem is that how do you send a message from one person to another without having to trust everybody that is going to receive the message and transmit it to the next person? And the history goes that there were these 9 generals that were the 9 generals were surrounding a hill, were on the hill surrounding a village. They had to attack. And the generals have an army of 500 soldiers, and the defending village has an army of 300 soldiers. But the generals did not know what time they had to attack. So there was a messenger that's going to go to one general to another and then give the message and say, well, we're going to attack at 9 o'clock, let's say. But the problem is, what if there is a traitor in the middle? What if one of the generals is not honest? They could change the message and say, let's make it 8 o'clock. And if the general does that, then what happens? The army is split. Half of them will attack or less than half will attack at 8 o'clock, and then they will lose. So that was not going to be permitted. They would have to spend the first 10 minutes to write their own message, and then they have to spend another 10 minutes to rewrite the history of the other general, and another 10 minutes the history of the other general, because the new rules now were that not only they have to spend 10 minutes, but they also have to enclose the history of everybody else. And the messenger's instructions were that if the message is not ready in 10 minutes, then they have to go, which means that general is a traitor. So that general gets ignored. So this is how Satoshi Nakamoto solved the peer-to-peer transmission aspect by, without knowing anybody, you don't have to trust anybody. because they have to make this exercise, they have to spend 10 minutes, then the message can arrive with its own integrity at its destination. And this is really the essence of the blockchain, which is behind Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So once that Byzantine general problem was solved, then we could have the blockchain. So for the first time, these three fields came together: cryptography, game theory, and software engineering. And then we have the blockchain. And so you may be thinking, well, what's new about this? We have the banks that can do this for us. But the banks, how do they do this? How do they transmit money? The banks have databases, really. So if I have $100 in my bank account, it's really like a database entry that says I have $100. And if I want to send $5 to Gabby, they update the record in the database for my account, and there's a bit of a delay in between, and they send the message to Gabby's bank, and then at some point in time, Gabby's account is updated. But there's lots of time being lost between the synchronization because it's not all real time. And what the blockchain does, in the next slide, it does this trust right in the middle of the network. So I do not need another bank in the middle. So if Gabby and I had an exchange account, a Bitcoin exchange account or a cryptocurrency exchange account, I could send him money, you'd receive it in 10 minutes or less without having anybody in the middle. And the problem that they solved, it is called the double spend problem. And here's the problem. Suppose I have a digital photo right now. If I take a picture of you here, and if I send it to somebody, I still have a copy of it, right? You still have, but with the money, you cannot do that. If I'm giving you $10 and I owe you $10, I cannot still be having the $10 in my pocket. So the blockchain has solved this problem, which is called the double spend problem, which means that the minute I give you the $10, I don't have it anymore. But now it can be done anywhere in the world, anywhere across the internet, from any country to any country without any borders. The other way that I like to explain the blockchain is by talking about the analogy between Google Docs and Microsoft Word. How many of you use Microsoft Word when you conduct your business and you want to send documents to each other? Most of you do. So you're very kind of old-fashioned. I'm sorry to say that. This is kind of the past. How many of you use Google Docs? Not too bad. A third of the audience. So the analogy is, suppose you want to send a document to somebody in Google Docs, and you want this other person to make changes to it. What do you do in the meantime? Nothing. You wait. You have to wait until the other person makes those changes, and in the meantime, you don't know what the changes are until they come back to you. So this is how the world works today. All the databases, one database has to wait for another database, and there's a lot of synchronization issues and delays. If you're using Google Docs, there's only one version of the document. It's in the cloud. And the second that the other person is making those changes, you see them right away. So everybody is always on the same page. And that is the concept of the blockchain, because it maintains a shared ledger, a ledger, like an accounting ledger. Every time there's a new entry, it gets added after the previous entry. And nobody can erase anything. Every record is immutable. A very important feature of the blockchain is that every record is immutable. Once you write an entry on it, you cannot change it. It is written there for eternity. And then anybody can inspect this record. Just like you make a change on a Google Doc, it goes there forever. So, 3 ways to define the blockchain. You can look at it from a technology perspective and think, well, it's a distributed ledger. You can look at it from a business perspective and say, well, it's like an exchange network for moving value between peers. And you can also look at it from a regulatory and legal perspective because it validates the transactions. So that's kind of 3 ways of looking at the blockchain, and all of them are valid. And then, you can advance, keep advancing. So then, now the way to look at the blockchain is along 10 different dimensions. Again, now we're going deep into it. A lot of people think about it as a cryptocurrency or about just being a ledger. That is correct, but it is more than that. It's also a computing infrastructure because it's also a cloud of computers. What powers each one of these blockchains is thousands of computers. The Bitcoin blockchain, for example, has 6,000 computers that power it. Ethereum is the second most important blockchain, has about 6,000 computers as well. So it's a cloud infrastructure, it's a transaction platform, It validates transactions. It's a decentralized database. It's a ledger, yes. It's a development platform, very important. How many developers here in the room? Any? Developers are very important for the future of the blockchain. How many developers do you think there are in the world that know blockchain languages? Not too many. 5,000 to 6,000. Have you been working with? Excellent. You're a very rare person. So we need more of you, not just in Lebanon, but anywhere in the world. Just to give you an analogy, how many Java developers are there in the world? 9 million, 9 to 10 million. Why is Java so important? Because Java was the language of the web. The reason why we have web applications is because of the JavaScript, because you could write an application once and then it runs anywhere on the web. So you have on one hand 5,000 developers, you have 9 million developers on the other hand. So we need a lot more blockchain developers to move the field forward. It's an open source software, means that that doesn't mean that it's free. Yes, some of it is free, but it means that the innovation is open. It means anybody can contribute and add features to the technology, and that's very important. It's a financial services marketplace, it's a peer-to-peer market, and it's a trust services layer. At the end of the day, it is really about trust. The trust is now in the network, so we have been brainwashed that we need a trusted intermediary in the middle. We have been brainwashed that we need banks to transmit money, but you don't. You don't need banks to transmit money. Blockchains are like the web. Again, the analogy is that which came first, chicken and egg question, the web or the internet? Internet, because the internet was a network, and then the web came on top to make it much easier, and then we have web applications. The same thing with the blockchain. The blockchain is another overlay on top of the internet. But the blockchain does not need the web. You can write an application straight on the blockchain using the internet directly without using the web, and that is the innovation. Look what happened with the financial services, with what the field called fintech. A lot of companies started to surround the banks with PayPal, for example, for payments, for loans, or for investments. A lot of companies now are taking a piece of what the banks are doing. Maybe not as much in Lebanon, but at least in Europe and in the US, in North America, the fintech industry is very, very strong. And I use this analogy because the same thing is happening with the blockchain. This is a landscape that I put together, about 300 companies that are blockchain companies in financial services only. I maintain this landscape. It's the standard for the marketplace. If you're not on this chart, you don't exist, basically. So everybody wants to be on that chart. And that's what's happening. And many of them are startups. Many of them will fail, but many of them will become the next PayPals and will be successful. So they are a bit laggards. The big companies are. IBM is taking the services approach to it. So IBM is getting a bit more aggressive now. They have their own blockchain technology, and they are in the services business. Oracle is very much behind. It's a very good question because the blockchain, at the end of the day, it disrupts the database, and the Oracle is the biggest database company. I've been in talks with them, and we'll see where it goes, basically. So think of this as this is the next 10 years. This is the next 10 years to 15 years of the internet. What did the internet give us the last 20 years? Really 4 things, right? The last 20 years of the internet, we had email for communications. We had publishing. Anybody can be a publisher. We had e-commerce. We can buy and sell anything. And then we had the social web with Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. The next phase of the internet is about the disintermediation of trust, the decentralization of trust. It's about value flow without any intermediaries, and that's what the blockchain is all about. So the next slide will be about the fact that now we can have a lot of businesses to prove something. So you can prove the identity of somebody. You can prove the authenticity that you own this house, you own this title. And there are lots of applications to just prove the records. That because the blockchain is an immutable database, once you record something on it, you can go and check it. In the same way as today you Google for everything, in the future we're going to go and check the blockchain to verify the trust aspects. Did this person do what they said they did at this particular time? Does this person own this piece of land? And the applications for land registers are huge. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Let's keep going. There's a whole new world of cryptocurrencies out there. How many of you own Bitcoin or any kind of cryptocurrency? 3, 4. Okay, that's not too bad. But there are hundreds of cryptocurrencies. Go to a website called coinmarketcap.com, and you will see the list of all of the cryptocurrencies and their market value. Bitcoin is the biggest one. It has a market value of about $10 billion. The second one is Ethereum at $1 billion, and it goes downhill from there. And Ethereum, for example, was started at 15 cents 2 years ago. I'm on the board of advisors for the Ethereum Foundation. I'm also involved in the Coin Center and in a few other companies on that list.
The Ethereum guy, by the way, is the guy who did the preface of the book.
Yes, Vitalik Buterin was a 19-year-old Canadian born in Russia who invented Ethereum. He's now 22, and became friends with him, and I learned a lot from him, and he wrote the preface for the book. He's probably one of the most leading technologists in the area of the blockchain today. So go and see the world of the cryptocurrencies. Overall, it's only maybe worth $15 billion. It's not a lot, but it's going to get much bigger in the future. I remember when in '96, e-commerce was only $1 million. We were celebrating $1 million of e-commerce on the internet, and then it became $50 million and 100. Now it's $1.3 trillion of e-commerce on the internet. And think about everything starts small, and then it starts to get bigger and bigger. Okay, let's keep going. I'm giving you lots of ideas here. Hopefully it will generate some discussion at the very end. An example, I said to you that some of the blockchain applications do not need the web. They just go straight to the internet. And here's another one, OpenBazaar. Again, disclaimer, I'm an investor and on the board of OpenBazaar. But I use them not because of that, but it is really the biggest, largest application on the blockchain today using Bitcoin, outside of if you have an exchange or a wallet. And OpenBazaar is like eBay without eBay. Think about it, eBay without eBay. So you can buy and sell anything from anywhere in the world. Within a week of them opening up, they were available in 80 countries. You can buy honey from Greece, you can buy spices from Hungary, or whatever you want, and without any fees, without any credit card fees. The universal currency is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a great universal currency. You don't need to exchange it, you don't need to worry about what value of it, and then it's just like having one currency for the whole world. And as an example, so this person, next slide, did 20 transactions on OpenBazaar. All it cost him was $1.40. Whereas if he was on eBay, they would have to pay listing fees and credit card fees, and can go up to 11% of what you're selling. So this is the future of e-commerce, peer-to-peer commerce, without any fees in the middle. So regulation is a very important aspect of the blockchain. I was talking to a lady here earlier today who is looking at to advise the business environment here in Lebanon about compliance. So the thing with regulation is not to do it too fast. Not too fast, too early, because the blockchain is like a baby. So if you regulate too early, especially if you know how many financial regulation companies there are in the world, maybe 200 or so, maybe more. Imagine if each one of these were to regulate the blockchain in their own way, because everybody's going to interpret it differently. Then it'll be a lot of confusion. So we don't want that. If I'm an entrepreneur, if I'm a startup trying to develop a business with the blockchain, I don't want to have to deal with 200 different ways to interpret the law and the regulation. It's better to leave it alone at the beginning. It's the same way that happened with the internet. Early on, we did not regulate the internet. E-commerce was fairly free. We started to regulate a little bit later. So it's too early to regulate. And my message to regulator is that let them innovate too. In the same way that the technology is all about innovation, I think we can expect the regulators to also innovate. And they can innovate by accepting records of transactions that had happened on the blockchain. Today, if a transaction happens on the blockchain, it is not recognized yet by the financial institutions, but fairly soon it will be recognized. And the other way is that the regulators now can be a node on the network. The old way to regulate was to choke everything, is to ask for information, because the compliance anywhere in the financial services is going up. It's not going down. Everything has to be reported on, but it's all based on give me information. Whereas now there can be a node on the network, because the blockchain is about a peer-to-peer network, and they can be observing what is going on like everybody else. So the trend is going to be on intelligent analysis and monitoring to find anti-money laundering and illicit activity, because you can observe a lot and you can find what's going on by just having a seat on the network. Okay, let's move on. So the innovation is better in unregulated environments. That's where the startups start. And then they don't want to worry about regulation, but then they bring it into the regulation afterwards. Who's going to be the next Google of the blockchain? We don't know yet. It's still too early. I wrote an article in May. The title was, The Blockchain is the Next Google. So the next day I got an email from Google, and they invited me to come and talk to them. And I did that in July. So they are thinking about the blockchain, but we don't have a big company yet. Who's going to be the next Amazon of the blockchain next? Who's going to be whatever? Fill in the blanks. We don't know yet. It's still too early. Who's going to be the first large bank to accept cryptocurrency? It has been done. So 3 weeks ago, Santander, Spanish bank, not yet, internally, but internally. A lot of banks are doing projects internally, but this bank, Santander, is the first bank that is going to accept, if you have an account with them, you can transfer your account into Ethereum money, ETH. We all thought it was going to be doing Bitcoin, but they did not choose Bitcoin. They chose the ETH, the second largest cryptocurrency. And the banks follow each other usually. So when a big bank does something, I'm sure everybody is watching, and there will be others. And there's nothing to fear. There's nothing to fear about cryptocurrency.
But Santander is actually in a bad shape.
They're innovative right now.
Yeah.
I mean, Barclays is, you could say, in a bad shape, but Barclays is very innovative with the blockchain in the UK. Yes, but that's the way it is. Okay, next slide. We're going to cross $1 billion of assets traded on the blockchain. I predicted by the end of this year we'll have that. There are companies that are working on putting financial instruments on the blockchain, because it becomes like a rail, like a network for transacting financial instruments. Some examples of use cases. I get asked, like, who's doing what? So here's an example. A letter of credit is a very involved process, right? To do if you want to move, sell goods across the world. And here in Lebanon, commerce is very important. So doing a letter of credit is a big deal. It's a process that takes sending, couriering information, and it takes time to establish the credibility and verify everything. Barclays in the UK has tested a letter of credit transaction worth $100,000 between a farmer in Ireland who was selling butter and cheese to a small country in Africa, the Seychelles Islands. And somebody there got on the blockchain, proved their identity, got approved within minutes, and then the farmer shipped them the butter and cheese from Ireland. And that was just an example. Canada is experimenting with wholesale payments. I want to stay for a minute. Governments around the world are very, very, very serious about the blockchain. Estonia has an e-residency program. You can be an e-resident of Estonia. Anybody here can go and register and become an e-resident of Estonia without being there. Because now, once you're an e-resident, you can use their e-services. So this is one way that the governments are getting new revenue, by having people from outside use their e-services to register companies. Delaware is going to register all the companies there on the blockchain. Dubai is very, very serious. By the year 2020, they've declared 100% of the Dubai government is going to be on the blockchain. All the services will be on the blockchain. Everybody I know is now in Dubai, that people I know in the circles of the technology of blockchain, they're getting everybody there to see how they're going to implement it. You name it, Ghana, Georgia, Sweden, the UK. Land registry is a big application, especially in countries that are known to have fraud. So if they want to prove to the world that no, we don't have fraud anymore, if you put land on the blockchain, then you can have a more trusting environment. That's what Ghana is doing specifically. Energy, healthcare, manufacturing, other services. Okay, 5 minutes. Let's keep going. What we are seeing today, we are seeing what the regulators are doing is doing what is called regulatory sandboxes. So a sandbox is a place where they can test the impact of the blockchain with or without regulation by changing the regulation. So this is one way that they can test it, and then before they can implement it. So a lot of the regulatory bodies in the world, the CFTC that monitors the commodities in the US, the Federal Reserve Bank, who I was speaking at last month, are looking at doing that. And then, as I said earlier, the record keeping has to be accepted on the blockchain. It's very important. Identity on the blockchain is very important. Today, who controls our identity online? When you go and do something, it's really Facebook. Facebook and Google. Yeah, the social networks, they control our identity. But in the future, we're going to have our own identity on the blockchain. So you can be recognized, and that was part of the idea with Dubai, where the citizens get registered once, and that's it. That gives them access to all of the services. You don't have to every time show your ID. It's just, you're the same person. Why do you have to show your ID multiple times when you hit different departments of the government? You should be able to show it once and then be able to do any kinds of service for. And then there's a new world out there, what is called ICO, initial cryptocurrency offering, as opposed to initial price offering. So instead of going public, companies are going on the cryptocurrency, and they spin out their own currency. Ethereum was a initial cryptocurrency offering. They raised $18 million initially at 15 cents, just for people like us, just buying it. And then they don't need to get venture money, and they grow from there. Let's keep going. So in closing, I want to say a few things about Lebanon specifically. What are my recommendations? I'm not an expert in what is going on here, but I'm just giving you some very general thoughts. I think get educated, learn it, understand it, follow it. Very important. Again, I'm going to use the person that came to me, and the person had bought my book before. That's great. Get educated, because that's where it starts. You might be asking, is the leadership going to come from the private or the public sector? It can come from both. Don't wait for the government to issue policies or to lead. I think the private sector can lead and should lead as well. And then the regulators, they have to innovate. I hope the regulators can innovate and not just choke the system. So depending who you are, if you're a financial services, if you're a bank, you're going to follow. You have no choice. There are consortiums of banks. The R3 consortium has 74 banks. One of them actually is Toyota, so 73 banks and Toyota are in that consortium. They are studying the blockchain and implementing use cases. If you're an entrepreneur, you can develop any idea and just start a company using the blockchain, and that's a great way of getting involved. And finally, if you're a developer, we need more developers. Learn the blockchain technologies and start to develop applications. So these are some of the quick, high-level pieces of advice I would give. Start by taking a position. Well, the more you understand it, you can say, well, that's my position. That's what I'm going to do. That's what my intent is, and I think that's where it starts. So thank you, and that's my initial. I just want to say one quick thing. You saw the book behind, the second copy of the book here. I'm not sure if you can see it visibly. Can you see what language it's in? It's in Chinese. My book is getting translated in many languages, but the first 3 languages that it's being translated in, one is Chinese, the second one was Japanese, and the third one is Korean. So I use that as an example because to tell you that the Asian countries are very interested in the blockchain. And actually, Turkey is being interested in Turkish as well. Not yet, but we're working on that. Arabic, if you know any publishers, would love to sell them the rights.
Okay. Frankly, if you know anybody who can translate this in Arabic, I will publish it for you. Okay, thank you very much, Walid. It was extremely informative. I have a lot of questions. I hope the audience have questions too. But now I'm going to leave the floor to Stefan. Maybe you are going to give us some. Stefan actually is a certified Bitcoin professional, so he's certified into cryptocurrency stuff, and he's a banker. He's a professor at USG, and I think he has his point of view about cryptocurrencies, the blockchain, and the situation in Lebanon. Maybe we can go into this a little bit further. Thank you, Stefan.
So yes, speaking after somebody like William is not easy about the same subject. So what I will try to do is to give you maybe another angle, which probably concerns you more because it would be, let's say, the Lebanese angle. I'll give you an anecdote about Bitcoin and blockchain before we start the presentation. And the presentation itself won't be long, so I think it would be better to have Q&A. The first Bitcoins I bought, I tried for approximately 3 days to find a way to buy Bitcoins. It was extremely difficult. You would have to give more information than in a typical know your customer form in a bank. They would ask for a dozen of information. You'd have to open an account in a Western country and so on. So after 3 days, what I did is I went to a website called Local Bitcoins, where you can buy from peer-to-peer persons wishing to sell, and you go and buy. And I went and I met this young guy, 20 years old, who was fully into it. He had servers in the basement of his home, running 24/7 to mine bitcoins, to extract bitcoins from the platform. And he was interested in selling, so I bought them. I came back home with a paper with 32 hexadecimal characters on a paper, and these were my bitcoins. So it's really a very bizarre experience. And what's most interesting is that all of that happened in Saudi Arabia. There's a huge ecosystem of Bitcoin miners in Saudi Arabia, while officially it is not forbidden or prohibited, but it is not encouraged to mine Bitcoins and to get exposed to Bitcoins. So let us talk about Bitcoin and blockchain in Lebanon to give you a quick idea. First and foremost, and I think William said that, and I think he's absolutely right, the most important let's say, puzzle piece is regulation with regards to Lebanon. Why is that? Simply because current regulation is not encouraging at all. I mean, you have in front of you BDL as announcement number 900 that, according to your own interpretation of Arabic, it gives an indhar or it gives an تحذير أو تحذير, because both terms are used. So it's either beware of using bitcoins or don't use bitcoins and cryptocurrencies at all. The thing is, this was issued in December 19, 2013, a time when, if we can go to the following chart, again, here, sorry, just back, okay. A time when there was a lot of bad publicity around Bitcoin because of hacks happening on platforms, Bitcoin being stolen, Bitcoins being used in the dark web, let's say, or the criminal activities, etc. So it had a very, very bad reputation. And BDL, if we can go back, please, chose to regulate by issuing really a very direct and clear red light concerning Bitcoins. So it's not conducive, it's not encouraging to have anything in terms of developments of Bitcoin, which is the biggest existing blockchain today, or maybe technologically speaking, the blockchain itself. Next slide, please. Yeah. So still in the Lebanese case, there is no detectable mining activities. What do we mean by detectable? You have these websites that ping the networks, the Bitcoin network, and would try to guess the number of nodes, like William said, which are today about 6,000. The whole network has reached by moments 25,000 to 30,000 nodes. And what's interesting is that a node can be a group of computers. So the scale of the network is really enormous. If you want to gauge it in terms of electricity use, because it uses a lot of electricity, Bitcoin uses approximately over a year time half of the power consumed in Lebanon. So it's really, really a huge scale. So in Lebanon,
it's not a lot.
Yeah, depends on the standard. Yeah, so it's a tenth of Google, approximately, of Google power consumption. So in Lebanon, mining Bitcoins first and foremost needs electricity. So I think you guess why mining Bitcoins in Lebanon is not that developed. Mining requires also buying more and more advanced and sophisticated hardware that are dedicated to breaking the mathematical problem that is behind the proof of work, which is the other word for the solution for the Byzantine generals problem. So it's not, I don't think tomorrow we'll have really an ecosystem where we have vibrant Bitcoin mining. Next slide, please. I heard about, so this really is research in the making. I'm in the midst of the research, so these are really preliminary indications. I heard about an anecdotal case of a trading platform, William, you were asking me before, of a guy who is like 23 years old, and he has built from scratch a Bitcoin trading platform. And from what I heard, the trading on that platform is about $10,000 or $15,000 a day, and 90% of it is done in Southeast Asia. Out of here, his platform is here, the servers is here, and 90% of the trading is done in Southeast Asia. So yeah, we can't disclose. So that's anecdotal, but I think there is a lot of potential there, and we're going to talk about it in the last slides. Can we? Okay. There was also an attempt by David, I can't recall his name. He's also a Lebanese ex-McKinsey. He tried to launch a payment gate for Lebanon and for the region, in fact, for the Middle East. And from the start, he had a translation of the pages in Arabic, etc. And it's a very didactic website to teach people, to learn them what it is, for them to learn what it is. But it was closed. So this experience is maybe also an indication of the fact that at a certain point in time we need a real push and a real liberation, which might come from regulation, as I think. Okay, so we understood the terrible reputation, and this terrible reputation, Bitcoin, for example, has been declared dead 110 times by magazines, newspapers, websites of the likes of Forbes, of the likes of Financial Times, etc. So it is also fought by people who do not have forcibly interest for it to really gain momentum and become an alternative to the classical or the standard financial system. Because as William told you, when I compare a transaction whereby I have to wait 48 hours for confirmation to arrive for my transaction, and in the 48 hours I'm not even sure that my counterparty can really pay me or not the amount that is transacted, compared to a platform where you can do it and get your first confirmation in 10 minutes. And after 6 confirmations, statistically speaking, it is considered as absolutely immutable, meaning you cannot modify anymore this reality that the transaction has taken place between A and B. Okay. So next slide also, please. This leads us to, in opposition to the negative views, to the positive views. So why all this excitement about Bitcoin and blockchain? Apparently, when you get to read about it, like I did, sometimes you forget to eat. It's incredible. I mean, the potential is so huge that you get more deeply and deeply into it, and you understand how much revolutionary it can be. So to give you a very quick example of what people are saying, let's take Nassim Nicolas Taleb, he's Lebanese. Bitcoin is the beginning of something great, a currency without a government, something necessary and imperative. In order to Bitcoin to make it, it needs to be banned by a few governments and critiqued by policymakers, otherwise it will fade. Sorry? Yeah, so that's a positive point with regards to the current regulation. Nassim Taleb has written lots of books about risks. He's extremely well viewed as a philosopher of risk. One of his books is Anti-Fragility, which is a theory that when you hurt things, they get better. So maybe this is a way of also saying the same. Andreas Antonopoulos is one of the, let's say, 10 gurus of Bitcoin. He has a lot of videos on YouTube. You can go and watch them. Very didactic, very easy to follow and understand. And he says banks warns of danger of Bitcoin because people already know of the dangers of the banks. Bitcoin, as William said, was born in 2008. And that's not a chance. 2008 was one of the biggest financial crises we've been witnessing. Bitcoin is not unregulated. That's a very important point. Bitcoin, he says, is not unregulated, which means it is regulated. It is regulated by algorithm instead of being regulated by government bureaucracies. So you have a code that is written, that is open source, that can be modified by anybody who wishes to modify it. And when you have consensus around it, you have a community, and they use the same software, and Bitcoin gains value because it is adopted by more and more people, or Ethereum, or whatever other cryptocurrency. The last one is my preferred. Bitcoin is a red pill. Have you seen the Matrix movie? When Morpheus presents a blue pill and a red pill? Yeah, the red pill is reality. The blue pill is artificial, is what they want you to think reality is. The red pill is go backstage and I will show you. Okay? So that's a bit libertarian as a point of view. This guy is known to be libertarian sympathetic. But anyways, the real idea here is that it may be a revolution of such scale that up until now it has been fought. And today the use of the blockchain term instead of Bitcoin is a recent trend for the global community to better accept the idea and start thinking and working about it compared to the negative reputation of the Bitcoin. So quickly, blockchain has become mainstream. The Bank of England has conducted a study about central bank digital currency. If it ever uses this technology, the blockchain, and issues its own central bank digital currency, the impact on the GDP would be an additional 3% growth a year. In the US, to give you another example about regulation headache, 2 judges issues within a couple of months contradictory rulings. The first one mentioned here, Judge Alison Nathan in Manhattan, she declared Bitcoin is money on September 19, 2016, 1 month ago. The judgment follows a recent Florida ruling in which the judge decided the opposite, which means Bitcoin is not money. So there is still this big question mark around what it is. And I think the advice given by William is bull's eyes with regards to reading more about it, conducting research about it, trying to understand it, and digest it because it's really needed across the globe, not only in Lebanon. R3, so William mentioned that, 74. My last pointage was 50, so good for me. Next slide, please. The notion of shared public ledgers, this is the, let's say, another word for blockchain. The notion of shared public ledgers may not sound revolutionary or sexy, neither did double entry bookkeeping or joint stock companies. And this is The Economist speaking. So when you talk about double entry bookkeeping and joint stock companies, you're talking Renaissance time, a couple of centuries ago. So they put the blockchain technology on par with such revolutionary financial techniques. Blockchain technology continues to redefine not only how the exchange sector operates, but the global financial economy as a whole. That's the Nasdaq CEO. And Nasdaq is the stock market for mainly technological companies. So it's becoming more and more mainstream and going into really real world applications. So what about Lebanon? The BDL and universities should conduct studies, seminars, research in order to get a better understanding and to know how to give the impetus in terms of regulatory momentum for this. The research can be synthesized, it can be debated in the country. There is a need for a change in the regulation, and maybe, William, you can tell me who talked to you about that, the lady you said. Yeah, maybe we can discuss that and now in the Q&A. So what about experimenting with a BDL-sponsored or Arab-sponsored cryptocurrency? Why not? I mean, there has been in the cartons for years now a plan to unify the currency for Arab countries. And in the Gulf, 4 to 5 years ago, there were serious steps being taken to have a unified currency. So why not? It could be a cryptocurrency. This is the trend now. What are Lebanon's advantages in terms of research or in terms of real application on the blockchain? We all know about them. Brains and entrepreneurship, financial tradition. William also mentioned Dubai efforts in that field to deploy blockchain registries and global blockchain council. And it's a real opportunity for Lebanese because we all know that there are a lot of Lebanese working in Dubai, and culturally speaking, it's closer to us. Circular 331 and the availability of funding by BDL for startups. And in that field, yesterday there was a panel. There's a fund called Phoenician Fund launching now, and which is going to specialize in fintechs. So that may be also a possibility to get financing. Spearheading regulation as BDL was the first to legislate the subject. BDL issued its notification, its warning, let's say, in December 2013. In February, Jordan issued a copycat, okay? And we don't know yet what other countries, Arab countries, are going to do in that sense, but there is no official regulation issued yet. So it can really play a role of spearheading this debate and this regulation. Thank you very much.
Right on time, Stefan. Thank you very much. I heard some very interesting words, notions, ideas. I heard the word that I loved actually, libertarian, libertaire in French. And I think the essence of this technology and this new way of doing business is actually to be free from the systems that are already implemented and doing the control and the authorization. So maybe we can we elaborate a little bit around this point of creating a new way of doing business in a freer environment? So I will take two answers.
The source of Bitcoin, which is to enable peer-to-peer exchange, appealed very quickly to the libertarian movement as soon as it became available. But my point of view is to be free does not mean that there is anarchy. Yeah. Some libertarians want total freedom in terms of they don't value the government role for anything. They just want to be doing everything without the government. So that's a very extreme view. But there's another view in the middle, I think. I'm more of a middle kind of a point of view where I think it's good to have freedoms. It's good to have abilities that enable us to have more power ourselves. So the peer-to-peer is about empowering the individuals. Why do I have to go to the bank and spend 20 minutes with a teller that does one wire transfer every month? And if you make a little mistake, as you know, on the little address, or you write something wrong, like good luck in tracing a wire transfer. And I can do this on the blockchain, with a blockchain exchange, just by staying at home and doing it that way. It doesn't mean I'm doing any illicit activities. It doesn't mean I'm laundering money. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean I'm not paying my taxes. All of these things are still there. Identity is still there on the blockchain. So one of the things that the libertarians want is anonymity. And anonymity is one thing that the regulators hate. They hate because if there is a crook, if there's somebody doing anything illegal, it's very difficult to find them. They can be found, but it's more difficult. So identity is not to be removed from the blockchain. If anything, identity is an enabler of services. And the blockchain is coming to the rescue and trying to prevent fraud. There are applications in Singapore where they are using the blockchain to prevent fraud that came from a Chinese bank with invoices. They were sending multiple invoices or the same invoices, and they defrauded a bank in Singapore by $200 million. So here's an example where the blockchain is being implemented to stop fraud. And when I talk to some of the governments, I talk to them and I tell them, first start with preventing fraud. So if a government wants to prevent fraud, they can with the blockchain.
Yeah, Stefan, your point of view because of the recording.
Yes, no problem. Schematically speaking, if we had to draw the banking system and compare it to Bitcoin or other blockchains, the very big difference that would pop up is centralized vs decentralized system. The banking system is centralized by definition. There is a bank behind banks called the central bank that prints money out of crazy to wash us out of the current crisis. But we're not talking economics and finance. Decentralized vs centralized. The very difficulty of the current establishment to digest the Bitcoin, blockchain, and other decentralized networks is that there is a complete, irremediable loss of power for the intermediary. I mean, you don't need any more intermediaries. When you had to send a message to somebody in 1970, you had to use postal services. Today, peer-to-peer, you can send emails. Nobody would even look at your email. Nobody can control it. So it is really this notion of decentralizing control over one's destiny, life, financials, whatever, that comes as a contradiction to the existing system. Libertarians, politically speaking, they would fight an established system, centralized, but it has attracted libertarians because of its very technological features. And I think whenever you have a system with so much advantages over an old existing one, it's a question of time of having it dominate the old system. There's a small anecdote I'm going to tell you. about when cars were introduced in the U.S. Back at the end of the 19th century. The whole infrastructure was built around horses, and cars had to come and adapt to a ossified system, which is dirt roads for horses to cross, etc. And they even car drivers had to wait for horses to pass with a man wearing and waving to direct to direct traffic, and so people wouldn't see the advantages of cars at first, because cars had to go slowly on the road, cars had to run over mud roads instead of asphalt, etc. And slowly but surely, cars took over. And it is the same case here, because for the time being, Bitcoin or other blockchains, but I'm particularly talking about cryptocurrencies, they have to be part of a global financial system that is, on average, 100 years back, the cryptocurrency technology.
I would add something. Sorry. You said something about the intermediaries. I would add something. I don't believe all of the intermediaries are going to go away. I think there are three scenarios. Those that do not change will go away. So if you ignore the blockchain, in the same way that if you ignore the internet, many publishers are not in business today because they ignored the internet, or they were too slow to move into, to adapt, exactly. So some of those that adapt will be able to survive, because I tell them it's easier, it's better to shoot yourself in the foot than to have somebody else shoot you in the head, because you can survive and go on. And then the third types of intermediaries, there will be some new intermediaries that we don't know about yet, that will be the new trust intermediaries. So these are the three scenarios for the intermediaries.
William, I would tend to think that there is a contradiction between saying the word intermediary and talking about a blockchain. There is a fundamental contradiction. And that's why I think banks and other big players, if we're talking about the finance / economic sphere, would definitely be they're not needed. I mean, they can very freely develop their own cryptocurrencies, they can very freely develop their own blockchains, but down the road, the very idea of it all is about being open source, being freely modified by anybody. I mean, today you have 5 different versions of Bitcoin, 5 different Bitcoin applications, because at a certain point in time, the community of Bitcoin users was not okay. There was a debate, and regularly, those who want to modify the software in a certain way that suits them better would بيفتحوا على حسابهم, as we say in Lebanese. They develop their own version, and they would use it among themselves. And then you have a Darwinian effect, which is the fittest would survive. Yeah, exactly.
But what's really going on as well is the banks are getting together with each other, and they see the blockchain not as a revolutionary thing or not as something that is going to put them out of business, because the banks don't want to disrupt themselves, but they want to improve themselves. So what they do is they use it as a way to save money, or to make a process faster, or to have agreements being reached in seconds or minutes instead of days. So, but we should not look at what the banks only are doing, because they are not going to be the biggest innovators. They see the blockchain as another IT technology. And they can be busy for the next 10 years just implementing projects that save them 10%, and they get excited about it, which is good. But the innovation is really happening with startups that are creating new things that we don't know that we don't have today. I mean, there are new clearing networks that are being developed. A company called Clearmatics for the derivatives and over-the-counter markets. That will be a new network. It will not be the Nasdaq. It will not be the DTCC. It will not be anything we see today. It will start with 0 customers, like all the startups start with no customers. But it will be a new way of doing business where the assets are on the blockchain from day one. So we have to look at the innovation as well, not look at the incumbents.
Great. Let's take some questions from the audience, please. Yes, go ahead. Just before asking, I would like you to take the microphone.
Thank you. The question is to Walid. How was the Ethereum hack undone? And I have another question also to Walid. Can you explain a little bit about smart contracts and how we can use them?
Advanced questions. These are very good questions, advanced questions. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So I had smart contracts on one of the slides, but I took it out. The smart contract is another word, fancy word for business logic. It's really business logic put in a program. So because the blockchain is about programming money, so now we can program money, but it's not, how do you program money? By just putting rules on it, by putting logic behind it. So I can have a bet with you and say, if tomorrow the temperature is more than 25 degrees, then I owe you 1 Bitcoin. If it's less than 25, you owe me 1 Bitcoin. And we put that into a contract on the blockchain, and that's it. It's tied into our bank account, to our exchange accounts. And that's it. We don't do anything. There is the smart contract will go and check the weather temperature on its own. It knows that. And automatically, by the end of the day, whoever wins gets the 1 Bitcoin automatically. We don't do anything. That's it. That is an example of a smart contract. So I answer that question first because that ties into the second question, which is what happened with the Ethereum hack, which is the DAO, the Distributed Autonomous Organization, which was a bit of an ambitious project that was a series of smart contracts. So they put rules into an organization that was supposed to dispose of money to invest into other companies. And in the technology world, in the startup world, you learn sometimes more from failures than from successes. So this was a failure, clearly. It was a failure they put too many smart contracts that were too loose and badly written, and there was a fault in those smart contracts. It's like if you write a bad program today on the web, you can't blame the web. You just blame your application, and somebody can come in and hack you, and it's because you wrote a bad program. And we get hacked all the time if you're not careful with your passwords, with your security procedures. So the blockchain is no different. It's about technology. You can write bad programs, you can write good programs. So because the technology is new, they did what is called a hard fork, which is like a reset. It's like it gives you a chance to reset things. If you think you're going in the wrong direction, you have a chance to change direction and correct and undo what damage you have done before. And this is okay initially. Initially, it's okay. But hopefully, over time, then we'll need less of these corrections because we want stability in the long term. But this is part of the initial evolution of something that is not very mature. And now we are behind it, basically, and we move on.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, how would the government tax cryptocurrency or Bitcoin? Could it be that they oppose this move because they don't know how to regulate it or how to tax it? Could it lead to another financial crisis? There's this thing I learned that in Germany, regulatorily speaking, Bitcoin is considered as a means of exchange. Money typically has 3 functions: reserve of value, means of exchange, and unit of account. And in Germany, they consider it as a unit of account, which is, I think, the last function Bitcoin will have in probably 10 to 15 years, when everybody's going to trade in Bitcoin, use Bitcoin to transact, etc. Then corporations and people would tend to use Bitcoin as a unit of account. But for regulatory reasons, they do consider it like that, because tax-wise, if it is a unit of account, then under certain conditions in Germany, it is taxable. So the regulatory landscape is really contradictory. Across the globe, there are dozens of regulations that are not the same, that have been having until now a rather prudent and doubtful approach to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. I think, going back to your question, that tax-wise, definitely, at a certain point in time, when it's going to gain in scale sufficient weight, it's going to be taxable under certain or other conditions. Today, it's $10 billion worth of Bitcoins. Tomorrow, it might be 100 or 1,000. And when it's going to be, it's going to attract a lot of interest from governments. As for your last part of question, if it can lead to a new financial crisis, Bitcoin's volatility, which means technically speaking, its tendency to move and to have variations in its price, is above 12.5% monthly standard deviation of daily returns, which is approximately 12 times the average volatility of any given currency, dollar, pound, etc. So it's very volatile, and that was the case from a very early stage. But the trend today is for this volatility to go down. So the Bitcoin is stabilizing. It is becoming more and more mainstream, let's say, up to a certain point. So is there a financial crisis that would... I don't know if speculation is going to lead to that, but what the trend we are observing today is for a stability in cryptocurrencies and a maturing effect.
Yeah, without that, the gray line is whether you treat cryptocurrencies as a currency or as an asset, and it can be treated differently from a tax perspective. There is tax software now that you can add to any cryptocurrency transactional environment. So the point is not to avoid taxes. It's just another class of assets. It's another type of currency. If you go on one of the advanced exchanges like Poloniex or Kraken, you can exchange from any currency to US dollars, Canadian dollars, yen, euro, some major currencies to some major cryptocurrencies. It's just like another exchange. As far as taxing that specifically, I do not think it should be taxed in a special tax. It is because e-commerce is not taxed in a special tax. Only recently in Europe, they are taxing now e-commerce recently, which I think is a stupid idea. But for a long time, e-commerce really just apply the laws of the land. Whatever the current tax is, then apply it. There's no need to have a new tax for cryptocurrency in the same way that there's no need to have a new tax for e-commerce. E-commerce is something that thrives, that should go from any place to any place and just use the existing laws for that.
Yes, please.
Thank you. First of all, Patrick on Jamal Trust Bank. I believe that my friend, the lovely lady, she stirred some interest regarding your personal interest regarding her zeal for blockchain. Personally, I was the first one who clarified the BDL article. I kind of wrote an article which we put in the magazine for the Lebanese Banking Association to clarify what is Bitcoin, because it was simply blank. By the way, my name is Patrick On. So I'm more interested not in Bitcoin as a technology, I'm more interested in the blockchain, because I do believe that blockchain presents a lot of opportunities for a lot of applications, rather in the private sector or in the public sector. I have one point that kind of stirred my curiosity that was mentioned earlier. When it comes to taxations, let us suppose the Lebanese government was very forerunning and they adopted blockchain, which might seem like next to a kind of a, yes, 100 years. My concern here, should we let the regulator, or let us say the government, do an automatic check on the blockchain? Let us suppose, I'm going to take one example. I have one piece of land which is registered to myself on the blockchain, and I do a transaction, I pass it to Randa here. So eventually, as with the blockchain technology, there's a new record that's going to be written that this piece of land change ownership. At this point, since we are working in a parallel ecosystem from the government, usually you have to go there and you have to register in the land deed and everything in order to do the valuation and get taxed on it. Should we allow, or is it okay, let us say, to get the regulator to automatically check the blockchain without my consent, and whenever he finds a change of ownership, he can directly debit her account or whatever? Is it how should I say? Is it an attempt on personal freedom or?
No, I don't.
Excuse me. Sorry. We have 3 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm done.
Let's be quick.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's not any different than today. If they know that you sold the land, they're going to give you the.
But they don't because it's done on blockchain. Let's
Why
suppose.
would you hide it? I mean, if you want to hide it, yeah, it's a problem. If you want to hide it, I mean, not you, but if the person that does it wants to hide it, then yeah, the blockchain is going to prevent fraud. So there's an interest for the government to implement it because if they want to decrease fraud, I would say the blockchain is the best way to implement transactions because the identities are known. Now, they should let you report it the way you want to report it and not tax you right away because you don't know how else it fits with your assets and how it fits with your other taxation. But they know about it. So if you want to hide it, they will know and come back to you in a year or so.
I see.
I would add something. It depends on which blockchain. If, for example, it would be a adopted blockchain for land registry in Lebanon by a private company or something like that, it would have such scale. It would have such scale that it would be known to the regulator or the tax authorities. In any case, the big thing, the big idea also is this Darwinian effect, whereby the best would win. And I think whether it is for real estate or other assets, a dominant blockchain can be used by all parties, and authorities can be participants. And by definition, there is a lot of transparency on blockchains, and information is freely available. So yes, by all means, it's not the land itself that would be transferred. It's the title deed that is written on the blockchain, and to which authorities can or cannot have access. It depends how do you want to do it. But if authorities don't have access, then you are in a private club, recognizing ownership between people without the wider public being aware of it.
But then we will go into a paradigm which is what's real, what's virtual.
Yes, I agree.
Because we're talking in two different.
Yeah, and then probably the one that is closed would die because it's not open, because it's not freely available, etc.
Thank you.
Okay, our time is up. If you have one last question with a yes or no answer, I will take it. Yes.
Blockchain changing the internet protocol itself, the ownership of domain names, DNSs.
Repeat the question, please.
Do you see blockchain as a technology that changes the internet again in some evolutionary way?
Answer yes or no.
Yes, sir. Yes. Well, yes.
Okay, another one with yes or no.
That's the big debate of decentralization, because that would imply...
Sorry, the question was what the speaker thinks of the block size debate, whether the block size of Bitcoin should be increased to an unlimited value or remain at 1 megabyte.
My answer is not yes, no. My answer is le roi est mort, vive le roi. Meaning it's a debate today in the community, and the winner will take all. As simple as that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers.